I'll let you take it from there.
Good morning, or afternoon, or good day. One of these days I'll figure out the right intro, and thank you for the getting this kicked off. October, love it. Um, Here in Tucson, the weather's really nice, and things are cooling down finally, and I hope everyone else is enjoying the fall. So yes, today's presentation is Accessible Restroom. And as I was putting this together, having been RAS when I was in the state of Texas, Registered Accessibility Specialist, number one question would be, why does an ADA, or in case of Texas, TAS, just give me the final solution? And so that's kind of what we're going to jump into and find out the why. Of course, this is a AICES provider. CSINext is a registered provider, and we will be at the end of the survey. There's a place for either to get your certificate or uh, plug in your AIA number and get credits for this. All this material is copyright by me, but I'm also going to provide the presentation at the end in form of a PDF, because I think there's a lot of useful information here for everyone. So the learning objectives, as in the advertisement, is basically understanding and comparing what is ADA and ANSI. You'll hear that kind of, everyone says it needs to be ADA compliant, but ANSI is the code, and that's what we'll use to get it constructed, exploring each of the sections that it takes as they relate to getting that restroom to be compliant, the do's and don'ts, any misconceptions of the accessible restroom, and then finally putting all the pieces together. So let's talk about this briefly, the codes. And the first one really isn't a code. The ADA, which is also known as the ADAG, or American Disabilities Act Accessible Guidelines, later to become the ADA standards. And it's the 2010 standards dated July 23rd, 2004. And this is civil law. And the difference is between civil law is if you're not in compliance with something, somebody has the right to sue you. And this is more than obviously just restrooms, but accessibility to the entire uh, building, facility, and anything that the ADA can be applied to, equality. ANSI is a code, and it's tied back to the building code. And then you have different states, as in the case of California, they have their Title 24. Texas actually has what's known as the TAWS, or the Texas Accessibility Standard, and that has been approved by the Department of Justice to be equal to the ADA. So if you're in compliance with TAWS, you're meeting the ADA. Does it mean you can get sued? Yes, but it's a whole nother process there. So kind of talking a little bit about the history, and most of this we're going to focus on the ADA. And the National Council of Disability, or NCD, was actually founded in 1978, and they put their first report together in February of '86. So you can see typical government, about 8 years, and they have the report, and then with that, they propose the law, and then finally, 1990, July 26th, ADA is signed into law. So this is when the changes began, but really they began 2 years later in 1992. And then, so with the 20-year anniversary coming around the corner, they wanted to get caught up with current codes, and a lot of different things that they've learned in 20 years. Uh, um, so they created this draft revisions, or what was known as the ADA standards. That was what came out in 2004, and then known as the ADA standards 2010, and then it went into effect March 15th of 2012. So the ADA is broken down into 10 chapters, and basically the ADA standards is very similar to ANSI. in once you begin with Chapter 3. Chapter 2, the scoping, and that really tells you what you need and where you need it. In ANSI, in the code, it is basically 3 paragraphs or 3 sections, and that's it. Where in ADA, there's 43. So that's really the nuts and bolts and how to apply the ADA to your facility. And we're going to focus on Chapter 2, scoping. Chapter 3, the building blocks. That's all the components, the clearances, the floor spaces, everything that it takes to make a facility or an element accessible. And then, of course, being an accessible restroom, we're going to skip over 4 and 5 and jump into Chapter 6 and pull a lot of the information out of Chapter 6, the plumbing elements and facilities. And there's other things that may apply. Your communications in Chapter 7, special rooms, spaces, elements. Anything that's built in would be in Chapter 9. And then a new chapter to this is Chapter 10, the recreational facilities. Prior to the 2010 standard, there was nothing that covered the recreational facilities. So the main pieces to put together an accessible restroom: you have your scoping, 201 or 202, is it new or existing? And then also scoping 213, toilet and bathing facilities. Your reach ranges, 15 to 48 inches. This is how high off the floor something is. The clear floor space, the all famous 60-inch turnaround circle, the 30 by 48 inch space that the wheelchair actually occupies. Door swings, water closets, grab bars, urinals, and I'm putting the pieces together. I'm doing a single restroom, so I'm just going to touch on urinals as if you were doing a multi-stall, but I'm not going to apply that to the pieces. Lavatories, toilet compartments, same thing. We'll talk about toilet compartments, but we're not going to apply it to putting the pieces together. Accessories, and then finally tolerances. One of the things that changed from the old ADA and the new ADA is what are the tolerances, and it was never really addressed. And so they've either built it into the dimensions, or if there's a fixed dimension, there's a note that the tolerance is whatever considered a construction tolerance. And we'll touch on that as we go through some of the examples. So if you've ever been in an ADA stall, there's just so much room in one of these. And there's a reason for that. And that's why we're going to look at the all of the dimensions, tolerances, clearances that apply to your situation. So to do that, the first thing we need to jump into is the scoping. And we talked about, is it new or existing? And with that, so depending whether you're doing 201 or 202, all new construction, the entire ADA applies and you don't get the exceptions. But 213, the very first sentence and the paraphrase is, where provided, it must comply. So if you don't provide something, it doesn't have to comply. And I know that's kind of saying it redundantly, but if I don't provide a paper towel dispenser, I don't have to worry about that complying. But if I do provide one, then every aspect of it, from the clear floor space to the reach range, must comply. But let's talk about some of the exceptions in existing facilities, or even new facilities for that matter. Alterations were technically infeasible. So if you have an existing building that was built in 60s or 70s or even the 80s, you may find that, there was some early ANSI stuff going on in the 80s where they had what looks like the alternative accessible stall, but you're right up either against the outside wall of the building, or exit corridor or something, and it's just technically infeasible with the structure something. But there's always a but to the exception. You have to, in the building, provide a unisex as opposed to altering the existing ganged restrooms or any of the other restrooms. Historical buildings, same thing. You're not required to change the aspect of any of the historical restrooms that are in there, but you have to provide a unisex. Portable toilets, and we're not talking construction sites here. We're talking concerts, large group gathering, events that are outdoors where they, bring in, 20, 30, 50, 100 portable toilets. 5% of these still have to comply, and you'll see that in those portable toilets, they do make them where they're big enough to get that wheelchair and a little ramp up to them and everything, and they're complete. Another exception, cluster of single toilets. A good example is if you've ever been in, doctor's offices. They don't, if you have a large group of exam rooms, you don't have gang restrooms, but you have a bunch of, little restrooms for, samples and so forth, because the turnover. Well, in that case, only 50% of those have to comply. And then the last exception, private offices. And this is all the way, you won't find this in scoping, but this is actually in section 600, which is under plumbing. The private office, so if I have an office just for myself and I want a restroom so I don't have to go out into the masses of the call center or the business, then I don't have to have an accessible restroom. But once again, there's always a but to all of these. It needs to be adaptable. So you're still required for all of the floor spaces. Your water closet has to meet its clearances and dimensions and everything. So we come down to how many? At least one toilet compartment, water closet, urinal, lavatory, mirror, cook shelves, at least one. Has to be compliant. And if you have stalls and if you have 6 or more, then you, besides providing the one toilet compartment, you have to provide at least one alternate stall. And we'll talk about that a little bit also when we talk about toilet compartments. So basically you have your one large stall that we can do our large dance in, and then you have an alternate stall if you have more than 6. But otherwise, everything else in the room, at least one of each, has to be compliant. Reach ranges. This is probably the number one thing that gets most facilities when I see the restrooms is paper towels are too high, coat hooks are way too high. Because if a robe is, 4 feet, 5 feet long, and you don't want that dragging on the floor. The problem is our reach range. So what is the reach range? It's broken down back in the building blocks, section 308, and you have a reach range of 15 inches, that's off the floor, to 48 inches high. Anything mounted over 48 inches is not in compliance in your reach range. And in 309, this basically refers back to operable parts. A good example is if you have any kind of coin-operated dispenser or soap, it has to comply with 308. And of course, as everything else in the ADA, there's always an exception. In this case, it's gas pumps. It goes back to the old 54-inch. So they did not take away that 54-inch reach range height that you used to have. In the side reach range prior to the 2010 ADA standards was 54 inches, but just strike that out, toss it away. That's not the case anymore. The 54 inch is gone, except for gas pumps. Then we come into the clear floor space. And we're going to talk about objects above 27 inches cannot extend more than 4 inches. That's basically what's known as a protruding object. And so if you're projecting out more than 4 inches, you're impeding into that clear floor space. And the reason of that magic 27-inch number isn't so much so that the wheelchair can pass under it, which it does help with that, but really it's for the blind. And so when they swing their canes back and forth, that 27-inch mark and greater than 4 inches from a wall, because if they're tapping against the wall, anything greater than that, they'll see it, they'll recognize it, and they'll know to step around it. So that's where that protruding object comes from. And also it does impact your clear floor spaces. When your wheelchair isn't in motion, so if you're in front of any device, that could be your lab, your dispensers, you need to provide that clear floor space of 30 inches by 48. One of the things about this clear floor space, and if you're creating an access to, say, a paper towel dispenser or a lab, that lab, there's nothing in the ADA that requires it to be centered on that 30-inch mark. So what that does is that does give you flexibility. It's a good rule of thumb in the case of a lab and lavatory. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but to center it on it, and you'll kind of see the reasons why when we put the pieces together. The last piece of this is that allowing that wheelchair to turn around, the magic 60-inch circle. And you'll see a lot of times in design plans where they'll put that circle and make sure that nothing is inside of it so that the person can turn around. If you do have objects that are protruding into the space, there is an alternative. And this also works if you have like two corridors that are teeing into each other, and it's known as the T shape. It's still 60 by 60, but you can see you get to carve out of each corner a 12-inch by 24-inch area. And I see a couple questions that came in. How was the, I'll leave out the extra word. How was the 5-foot circle determined? The 5-foot circle is for an adult wheelchair, and they said, can it be less for children? And I'm not on this, I'm not going to address children, but the circle is the circle, and I don't believe that there is a reduction for the 5-foot. But it was determined that to be able to get completely turned around in a wheelchair from the front foot pedal to the rear of that tire, you need that 60 inches. Okay, and then, yep, good follow-up. Some lay people think that by itself guarantees accessibility, and you're correct, it does not. There's more to accessibility than just providing the clear floor space, and that's what we're going to kind of touch on next is some of the reach ranges. And yes, this seminar is being recorded and will be available shortly, if not today, probably by the weekend. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the door swings. We got to get in and out of the space. And I stumbled upon this photo. I love the intent. They got the sign mounted right. They've got the pavement marker on, even though there's nothing in ADA that requires it, but it is a good visual inspection. They've got the access aisle. This is a universal design, 11 foot by 5 foot, 16 foot wide, leading right up to the steps. So I can't even get into the building. Now here in the other photo, okay, I got into the restroom, but I've got a partition stall that I can't get. I don't have a 5-foot turnaround, and I can't get back to that door to get out of the restroom. So even though you may measure looking at the door, okay, I've got 18 inches. They've got that little dispenser right next to it because these were 12-inch tiles. But you can see that stall is only 30 inches away from that end wall. And then with the dispenser poking out another 3 inches, you know, it's impossible to, once you get in, you can't get out. In the door swings, there's a little matrix in there, and a lot of people find it not confusing, but The graphics are always better, but one of the things to remember, graphics versus text, all the graphics provided in the ADA are there only to illustrate the requirements of the rule, but they're not enforceable. So if there's conflict between a graphic and anything that's written, the written text wins. Kind of like, the specification. The written specification is your Bible for getting these things built. Same thing in the ADA. The written word carries more weight than the graphic does. The two main ones that really apply 90% of the time is your straight on push and pull, as opposed to approaching the door from, say, the hinge side or the latch side. So when it's a pull, that's where you need 18 inches next to the strike of the door, and they tell it latch size, but that's the same thing, just different term. So 18 inches, but on a push, you don't need any clearance. It can be all the way down to 0 because your door is 36 inches wide. If you remember, that clear floor space for the wheelchair is only 30 inches, so you've got 6 inches to spare. But keep in mind, even though you use 36-inch doors, that clear opening of the door is only required to be 32 inches. But that goes all the way from the rabbet of the jamb to when the door is in the 90-degree position. And it doesn't matter if the door can swing to 180. ADA doesn't give you any provision to get that door all the way out of the way. And the reason being is, in the wheelchair, you can only push that door so far before you need to start wheeling through it. So that's why they determined that, okay, 90 degrees is a good measuring point. This is why we use 36-inch doors, because you have all those little, you have the space between the hinges and the door itself, the 1 3/4 door, the rabbet at 3/8 or ½ inch. So once you start adding these up, you're already under 34 inches. But everyone's favorite graphics, you can see the top two there, the push and the pull, the ones we need to be concerned of. Usually that applies 90% of the time when you're approaching a door. The other approaches usually happen when you have a situation where, a corridor or a joining room or something is forcing you to approach the room in one of these different orientations. But most of the time you can always use that front approach. So on the pull side of a door, 18 inches next to the swing, that's this space over here, and you need 60 inches clear beyond it. This is typically when you're inside the restroom. This is 90, as I said, 90% of the time, this is going to be the one that it falls under. The other one is approaching the restroom. Usually it's a straight on front approach. 48 inches wide, you can see no dimension. There is a however, and most single-use restrooms may only have a latch. They might not have a closure on them. So then this one with the red box doesn't apply. You have to have both the latch and the closure for that 12-inch requirement to fall into play. And the reason being is you're fighting that door closing and it keeps relatching itself. The person in the wheelchair needs that extra 12 inches to maneuver, their foot pedals or part of the wheelchair to help hold that door open so that they can get adjusted and then finish opening it. Doors with closures, usually that's the larger fight for the wheelchair to get in. But in this case, it takes both. Some of these others from the side approach, you can see in this item G, once again, latch and a closure. There is an exception though. When you're approaching from the strike side, and you can be down to 48 inches instead of the 60, but if you have a closure on the door, then you need, instead of the 18, the 24 inches on the push side of a door. So check your orientation, what makes the most sense for the person approaching the door. Do they have the room to get turned around and be facing the door straight on? Typically they do, and that's how you can determine which approach you need. And they vary. One of the rare ones is from the hinge approach on the push side. The clear space is not at the strike, but it's actually at the hinge side. But you can see almost all these others, it's always on the strike side of the door. So let's jump into the water closet. Okay, if your room's not big enough that you can't even get your door to work and you got to make a special cut of your door, you've got bigger problems. Here, you can tell nice large tile, so that's more than the 60 inches wide clearance. But whoever designed the stalls and the plumbing drawings, someone wasn't talking to each other. And then, of course, we don't even have a grab bar behind it. So let's talk about the water closet for a moment. And this is a single-use water closet, not inside of a stall. Okay. So the distance from the wall, and if you're familiar with the old ADA, it was 18 inches. And this was always the biggest headache and the biggest argument that contractors would have is, your underground plumbing is placed well before any walls are ever constructed. And the tolerance of that toilet is all over the place. So they're usually always either leaving leave outs or jackhammering out that concrete to get it right on that 18 inches. So what the new ADA does is it has a range. Anytime that you have a range illustrated, in this case 16 to 18, as a designer, it's good practice to pick that number right in the middle, 17 inches. Because if you tell them 18 and okay, they're thinking, okay, I got inch tolerance, that means they could build at 19. You're now outside of the range and you're now liable for, even though it wasn't built to your drawing specification, you're now in that big pool of liability. So it's better to pick the number in the middle whenever you're given a range. In this case, in an ambulatory stall, 17 to 19, pick the number in the middle, 18. Here, when it's in a corner, pick 17. The clear floor space is 60 inches from the parallel wall and then 56 inches from the perpendicular. Another dimension that you have to be aware of is the height of the water closet. And it's to the seat in the seated position. And the ADA does note that you're not allowed to have a springed seat. And I can't think of the last time I saw one, but it's still in there. And so that seat height has to be 17 to 19 inches. Most manufacturers, when they give you that magical ADA symbol that we're ADA compliant, make sure that it's not to the top of the bowl, and then all of a sudden you got another, if it's a 19-inch high to the top of the porcelain bowl, and then you put a seat on top of that, you're now out of compliance. So watch those numbers when selecting your seat. And once again, as a designer, pick that number in the middle. Start at 18, but usually whatever you design and specify from the manufacturer, they've taken that into consideration. You'll see this illustration in all of them out of the ADA. They show the grab bars, but grab bars are under 609, and we're going to talk about that coming up next. But here's another one that gets missed a lot, the flush valve. The flush valve always needs to be on the wide side of the stall. So basically what that you're in your wheel, you get off of the water closet, you're back in your wheelchair in this clear floor space. That's why they're putting the flush valve on this side. You can't reach it when it's over on the inside corner of the stall. So always remember in your drawings, either in the elevation or in plan, to note where you want your flush valve. Same thing, or jumping into the grab bars, you have the side wall and the back wall. And it used to be a little simpler. When the toilet was set at a static 18 inches from the corner, they used to tell you on the back wall that 36-inch grab bar was 6 inches from the corner. But if you actually do the math and you put your toilet at 17 inches, that means your grab bar is now only 5, so you would be out of compliance because you wouldn't meet the distance from the center out. 24 inches, you'd only be 23. So what they've done is they've now locked that back grab bar in with the water closet based on the center line. 12 inches on the short side, 24 inches on the wide side. Same thing with the sidewall. You'll see you got 12-inch maximum, 42-inch minimum, 54-inch minimum. So you can have a longer grab bar. But if you do a 42-inch minimum grab bar, which is pretty typical, it needs to be 12 inches from the corner, and that'll give you your 54-inch minimum. So if it's longer, great. It can be less than the 12, and that's not 12 inches from the corner, but if you're working with a longer grab bar. But if it's 42, you got to meet that 54. Then there's one more. One of the little anomalies in the ANSI is the vertical grab bar. And I didn't illustrate it, but basically, give me a second. Okay. Oh yeah, that's a horrible drawing. That's about where it goes. And because ANSI is referenced in Chapter 11 of the code, that all these little references to ANSI, and it's been this way since the 2009 IBC has referenced the ANSI 117.1 2009. So the two have been tied together, and they're still tied together in 2012 and the 2015 IBC. So even though ADA doesn't require it, this grab bar is required. And that grab bar is really designed for someone that's either on crunches or has some ambulatory issues where stooping, getting up, getting down. That's the intent of that grab bar. That's out there right in front of them. They can grab it and then get themselves, they can, it lets them finish standing up. So that's the importance of that grab bar. Okay, let's see. Switch back to pointer. And there we go. We don't need the vertical grab bar when talking about the urinals. Nina, have there been any other questions to come in?
Unfortunately, I am not able to see or type questions because I had questions,
Oh,
but I am not seeing them. So unfortunately, I am pretty worthless as you had expected. But
oh
since
no.
you asked, let me ask my question since I'm here. I was going to hold on to it. I have heard that there is the potential that there is going to be a change to that 60-inch circle in the next version of ANSI. Are you aware of any updates on that?
I have not heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised because that kind of goes back to the question, where did that circle come from?
Right.
Um, but kind of a small related story. Last project I did was a large staff quarter up in northern Arizona, and the owner, uh, we had provided several accessible units. We had to meet the percentage. And so he said, you being a RAS, you need to prove, whether all this works or not. So I actually had to spend the night in a wheelchair, starting from my car to get into the unit and cook, clean, shower, everything. And every little inch is of extreme benefit when you're wheelchair bound. So I would be, even though ANSI may do that and may reduce it, here's the thing, ADA hasn't. So you'll still always, under the civil law, under Texas accessibility standards, and even California Title 24, unless they change their laws, that 60-inch circle will still be required.
And I don't believe it was to reduce it. I think it was to expand it,
Oh,
actually.
there you go. Okay.
So, yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that. I've heard that it's going to go up to like 66 inches, but unfortunately, like I said, I can't, you're on your own on the questions because for some reason it's not letting me see those.
And wow, yeah, okay. Let's see here. And there were a bunch. Okay. The last slide referenced section 213. The A213 only goes to 203. Please advise. Okay, so I think that was a question in I'm sorry, we're going all the way back to scoping. I didn't see all these hiding there. And you're correct. Under ANSI, it only goes to 203. However, scoping under ADA goes to 243. So that's where that 213 comes from. I'm renovating such a building. Okay. Okay. And then the person, okay, they caught that. What about sliding doors? Okay with ADA? And the answer is yes, as long as the operable mechanism doesn't require anything special. And by special, I mean grasping. The simplest way to always test that, can I open and close a door by putting my hand in a fist? That's why you'll see everywhere indoor hardware, they use levers. The same thing, sliding doors, completely acceptable. Once the door is all the way in the open position, you still need that 32 inches clear to get by the door, and it's very easy to open a sliding door. And then usually the ones that get you are like the pocket doors. But if it's like a barn style door that's mounted to the outside, and when it's in the open position, maintain your clearance and maintain that you can get to that knob to grasp it, that you can get your basically a hand or a fist, or when I was a RAS, we used to always refer to be able to get the nub behind that door handle and be able to slide that door closed. And then you still have to maintain your pull force, and we didn't touch on that. And you still have that 5 pound pull force requirement. Give the contract. Okay, this is a good point. As a designer, yes, you can give them the range and let the contractor work it out. That's a good comment. I usually plumbing, you're tying down, and so as a designer, I just put the number in the middle. But you're right. And if you have an ADA catch-all sheet, you can explain all those ranges there and let them work it out. The vertical bar seems to force installers to place toilet dispensers below the horizontal bar, where our knees should be difficult to reach even for able-bodied people. Agreed. And you have all those clearances around it, and there are distances that let you work with that. And unfortunately, you're always taking out your left or right knee, if it's especially some of the larger dispensers. Sometimes flush assembly is so tall it interferes with the back grab bar, and that's coordination of the design. You have the height of your grab bar set at the 30. It's a range, and I didn't note that on mine, and I do in the example, but basically you have your grab bar height, and you just have to select a flush valve that doesn't interfere with it. Okay, I think that gets us caught up on questions. The toilet compartment, as I said, I'm going to touch briefly on this, but basically if it's a wall hung water closet, you get the same clear floor space, 56 by 60 inches. But floor mounted, you need 59 by 60 inside of the stall. And so when you're designing your stalls, make sure that those are clear dimensions, not to the center line of the stall. And then the other little piece of the puzzle is that 4-inch piece. And they used to have, under the old ADA, some different clearances, and it was confusing isn't the right word, but it was a little bit in contradiction of itself. So by forcing that 4-inch max, the door is always the opposite corner of your water closet whenever you're doing an install. And then on your approach, also keep in mind to be able to get, because you need that 42 inches clear, to get that door open. So you always have 4-inch maximum, so it can be less than that. It can be all the way at the corner. But what that does is that lets the person in the wheelchair wheel into this open space next to the stall. Lavatories. This is, I love this. I love this photo. You can tell almost everything just with all the distances. Okay, they've got the clear floor space, they've got the knee space, they've got the counter height, and then they selected just this really Art Deco modern that's way outside of the reach range. Same thing. And they, they've got their toilet or their paper towel too high, mirrors, borderline if they're right. So there's a lot of little items that come together. And that's the thing with lavatories is they used to have a catch-all. I think it was in the old section 4 of the ADA that kind of said lavatories were this, that, here's our clearances, here's our top heights. And they've since then taken all that out because there was also a lot of contradictions and a lot of questions. Why is the lab different than all my other clearances? So now under you start, the only thing in labs that says 34 inches and everything, labs are in 606. However, you still have to go back to all your other clear floor spaces. So you have the space in front of it. And this is where I was talking a little earlier, that the illustration shows it centered in the space, but there's actually nothing in it that says I can't put the lab all the way up against one side of this clear floor space. Where that's kind of beneficial is if you were overlapping some clear floor spaces, and we'll show that in the examples. Off the floor, 9-inch minimum for your toe space, and whatever the projection is based on the leading edge is 6 inches max. That's as far as a toe goes over. So if you do that 6-inch max and then work backwards, that's where your 48 inches work from. And then the knee space, that's the other 27 inches to the underside, 8-inch minimum clearance. And once again, that's a minimum at the top, but at the bottom, it's 11 inches. So you'll see like kitchen sinks where they do those privacy panels to protect the pipes, because one of the other thing is you have to provide insulated pipes, and you can either do that if you have like a vanity or a kitchen sink. All the pipes, the drain, the supplies, they have to be protected, because if you think of it this way, if you have no feeling in your legs, you don't know that you're running water too hot and you're burning your skin. So that's why the pipes are always protected. So the 5-foot circle can be under the lab. Yes. Another question that came in. As long as it doesn't interfere with the clear floor space. And I've seen that go by. In Texas, you get, and I don't know that they've clarified that. I've been out of Texas about 3 years now. You'll get some inspectors that will say, yes, it can be under the lab, others that won't allow it. The reason they don't allow it is that sink projects, that's higher than the 27 inches, because your top of your sink is, allowed to be 34, 27 inches clear. So can you really swing all the way under it? There's nothing that prohibits that it's real clear, but yes, it can go under it. So let's talk about the accessories. Make sure I can see all my little diagrams here too. So basically, when we started this off, we talked about the reach range, 15 inches to 48 inches. And then actually want to back up. This photo is a good example of a bunch of failures, and I just want to touch number one problem with accessories is you go to all the trouble to make sure you have, your pipes protected, your lav set correctly, and then they come in and either it's well past, it's maybe not a contractor, but an owner facility person is putting in all the paper towel and soap dispensers. So now we're starting to get things well outside of reach ranges. Toilet paper almost mounted at the top of the stall, well outside of the reach range, even for those of us standing up when we don't want to. So remember those reach ranges, 15 to 48 inches. Soap is a good example. Typically, if you can mount it over a sink to catch dripping soap to go on the sink and not on the floor, well, then your reach range has been reduced from 48 to 44 inches. So whenever you have an obstruction, and that's an obstruction up to 24 inches deep, you have to lower that reach range. Paper towels, one of the catch-22s there is it's a protruding object. Unless you put that waste receptacle under it, then you've addressed that. Mirrors, and you can kind of see in this one here, the mirrors, the reflective surface is mounted well beyond that 48 inches. I may mount, or the 40 inches, it's the reflective surface that you measure from. So any kind of frame, be it wood, stainless steel, and a stainless steel frame does not count as the reflective surface of a mirror. So keep that in mind, that you don't mount to the bottom of the mirror, you mount to the reflective surface. Toilet paper gets a little bit more complicated, and that comes back to that earlier question with that ANSI vertical grab bar. Where do I mount the toilet paper? They give you ranges in the ADA. It's 7 to 9 inches from the front of the toilet, perfect distance to take out your knees, and you can be 1.5 inches below the grab bar or 12 inches above the grab bar. So if you have a 36-inch high mounted grab bar, there's your challenge. You're 48 inches to the reach range and you're just barely there. Baby changing table, same thing. Watch your protruding object and your mounting height. Coin operated dispensers, that's the operable part. So where you put the coin in, turn the knob, those have to be within the reach range, that 15 to 48. And one thing to note about this is also a little bit of practicality. Even though you can mount a paper towel in that reach range, 15 to 48 inches, it's not practical to have your paper towels mounted down at, say, 24 inches. That's getting too low. And there are some considerations to those who have stooping problems, those that are on crutches or can't bend over. So one of the things to remember is when you're comparing that reach range is, can I get it when I'm standing? Can I get it when I'm seated? And what am I accessing at the time? So now let's put all the pieces together. And remember, these are just tips. This is my design approach. There's, as you can see, with all these different elements, there's many different ways, but you're either going to, the road to success, and you may design it successfully, and the construction, well, that may be another matter, but as long as you're keeping an eye on what's being constructed, you'll avoid the road to failure. So what I typically do is I start with the water closet and the grab bar. That's your biggest space component. And in this case, I did a 56-inch by 60-inch clear floor space, and then I put in my grab bars. I put the water closet 17 inches from the corner. And of course, I'll put the flush valve on the wide side. And then so my grab bar is 12 inches from the center line, 12 inches from the corner. So 42, so I get my 54 for the grab bar. So I've got my water closet set correctly. The lavatory has to be, and you'll see some older graphics where the lav is inside that clear floor space. That's only allowed in residential units. That's an exception. So we got to get that lav outside of that clear floor space. And then I need that approach. So I have the 30 inches and the 48, and I'm going to pull it 15 inches off of the wall, so that gives me the back wall at 86 inches. Then the door, okay, so I have 60 inches clear from the door, and I have to keep that clear floor space, that lab, out of it. So with that, that means the depth, and I grabbed the wrong line there. So the depth the other direction is not 84 inches. Subtract 5 from that. So it's 79 inches the other direction. So now I have my minimum footprint, and can I get everything else in there after I've got my 18 inches clear? So I have a couple small places of clear floor space to work with. I have here and then behind the door. So let's jump into all these accessories real quick. And so the soap dispenser, because it's, and I just illustrated a little bit off the sink, but let's say it's over the sink, that's 44 inches to the bottom of the soap dispenser. And then if you have a toilet seat cover dispenser, here's another, to mount it over your water closet, and this is one of those that'll usually get you. Remember, if I have an obstruction, I have to bring it down to 44 inches. So I got to get it out from over the water closet because I have to be 12 inches above my grab bar. So to the dispenser part of itself, I have to be 48 inches, but the bottom of the dispenser, in this case, I used one that projected out. If you do a wall mounted, or wall recess, it's a little different. You don't have to be as concerned with that. So I've got the 12 inches above the grab bar. I've got my toilet seat at 18 inches. I've got my grab bars 33 inches mounted off of the floor. And that's, once again, that's one of those range items from 32 to 34. So I picked the one right in the middle. And my computer software rounded the toilet paper to take out the knee. And this is ADA, not ANSI. And so if you have a double stall, this is where the question was before. If I have that vertical grab bar located right here, you just have to watch 12 inches above, and then make sure that uh, it's 7 to 9 inches is the range. So if I'm 8 inches to one of the toilet papers, then I'm within the reach range. I have a little bit of clear floor space over here, so I put the paper towel dispenser and the waste receptacle on the opposite wall. I did that, and I did the semi-recess. I stayed out of the door swing, and with a lot of keeping focus on health conscious, it's kind of nice to have the paper towel. Downside, maintenance doesn't like it because you're dripping the water all the way across the floor. And with that, I think I did it with 5 minutes to spare. Are there any other questions that have come in? Oh. And when you're designing an elementary school, for example, where most but not all users are short little kids, what do you recommend? ADA is probably too high. And they actually have an advisory with a child reach range depending on the grade for the ADA. And you're right, adult ADA is too high for your toilets, your reach ranges, and everything else. So you do have to adapt to those numbers that are provided. And do we have any other questions?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Daniel. Really, really appreciate it. It was a lot of information and
It is.
a lot of
I should have prefaced this as a fire hose seminar.
well, but I think it enlightens us and reminds us of things that sometimes we tend to forget or don't understand or just are not clear. So I really think it was really very good. And you said you were going to be providing the PDF of your slides, and I'm assuming will be available on the website.
Yes. Yeah, CSINext.org under past meetings. You'll see all of the past webinars. We've recorded them, and you can go back at any time and view the webinars. And then also on that same link, I will provide this presentation for download.
Excellent. Thank you again. Really appreciate it. Thank you to the attendees. Once again, if you want to receive learning units, please fill out the survey that will follow this when you close out. So, and include your AIA credit or your AIA number if you need AIA credits. So thank you again. Thank you, Daniel. And I wish you all a great October and a great fall. And we'll see you in November. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.